Hey, everybody. How are you doing today? Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad to have you here. Yes, what a lovely, lovely day it is. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always a pleasure to have you on here. We are streaming right now. We are on Rockfin. Well, we're about to be on Rockfin. I have to push the go live button. So there you go. Now we're on Rockfin, and we're on YouTube, and we're on Twitter, and we're on Facebook, and we are here. We are here, and it's awesome. It's really, really awesome. You all are probably wondering why you're seeing me through the lens you're seeing me. I am using my laptop camera. Unfortunately, I did not remember to bring the big camera with me to the office today. Slipped my mind with everything I've got going on. But I have my laptop camera, and we are still sitting here, and we can have a great, lovely chat. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always fun to hit the notifications bell. And yeah, we're just going to have a great time here, streaming, chatting. It's a lovely afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Be sure to share this on your Facebook, on your Twitter, on your, what is it, Reddit, and where else do you want to share this? Share this on your Bunker Chan, your Instagram, your Lefty Poll, your TikTok. Make a TikTok of this. The more people that are watching, the more fun we have. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. It's very important that you hit the notifications bell, because if you don't hit the notifications bell, you won't get notified that we're going to do this again. And tweet it out. Make sure to bring folks on. We're going to have a little afternoon chat. It's a little after 3:30 here. I am here in New York City. I'm in Manhattan. I've got plenty of unnamed diet beverage. I'm about to pour some of the unnamed diet beverage. We're going to have a nice afternoon chat. Now, the way we do things here, normally, the normal way that we do things on these streams is that I give my opening remarks. And then after that, we do a roll call, or I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then the remainder of the show is me answering your super chat questions for the rest of the show. And then when I run out of super chats, the show ends. That's how we normally do things here. But the last stream on Tuesday, we tried something new, something we'd never done before. And we opened up the StreamYard. We let people that are watching, that have a webcam or a computer or whatever, we actually let them come into the StreamYard. And it was awesome. It was very, 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 very awesome. So I'm thinking that we may actually do this again. We may do it again. We may let people back into the StreamYard today. I think before we go to, after I make my opening remarks, if all is well, we will open up the stream again. And let people in. But I'm not going to do that every time, right? I'm going to be careful how I do that, because I don't want people to start coming in and acting a fool. So we'll see. We'll see how today goes, whether or not I'll open up the StreamYard and let the fans hop in and make comments. Last time it went amazingly well. I got to meet American Autopsy, and I got to talk with, it was just great. A guy in Detroit, and a British fellow, Two's Time, came on. It's been really, really great. So that's the way. We may open it up. Not confirmed yet, but we may open it up later in the stream. So if you have something you want me to talk about, shoot me a super chat. It'll get answered in the second half of the show. It may not be the answer that you are looking for, but it will be an answer. I try to give good answers to questions, but I can't always give good answers to questions. That's how we roll. And yeah, we're just going to jump into my opening remarks. I was watching CNN earlier today. CNN is this, it's the mainstream TV network here in the United States. And I was blown away by how much CNN sounded like propaganda. They were doing a story about the Canadian truckers, demonizing those Canadian truckers, about how they're going to block roads and supply chains and they're dangerous extremists. And then after that, they were doing a story about a Trump supporter who now thinks that the Trump movement was a cult, and he's an ex-Trump supporter and he knows all about it. And I thought, my goodness, right? I mean, it's so blatantly biased. That's really just how American media has become. CNN is pushing the party line in the United States, and that is the party line. And it seems that the main opposition is the right wing. And so demonizing that opposition is what we do in the United States now. That was one thought I had. Excuse me. The other thought that I had was that Jen Psaki, the White House spokesperson, really looks an awful lot like Janet, the character Janet on the Netflix series The Good Place. I think she does. Other people think she absolutely does not. Some people say, oh, Caleb, I can totally see it. I can totally see it. They do look very similar. And other people see that and they say there's no similarity whatsoever. They look nothing like each other. What do you think? I mean, do you see the resemblance between Jen Psaki and Janet from The Good Place? I certainly do. I certainly do see a resemblance there. But there you go. There you go. There you go. So there's that. There's that. So I think from now on, if we refer to Jen Psaki on these streams, we're going to call her Janet. But we're not just going to call her Janet, because Janet is a lovable, good character on the show. But there is this other version of the Janet character, if you've ever watched the show, who's bad. So we are going to call Jen Psaki Bad Janet. We are going to call Jen Psaki Bad Janet. That is my new nickname for Jen Psaki. We are going to call her Bad Janet. Bad Janet. Bad Janet Jen Psaki. That is our new nickname for the White House spokesperson. Bad Janet Jen Psaki. And she is like a robot. And unlike Janet on the Good Place show, she does not become more human each time she is rebooted. I would argue she's become less human. But there you go. Bad Janet Jen Psaki. I wanted to get that out of my system. So there you go. So there's that. But the main thing I wanted to talk to you about today in my opening remarks was the fall of the Roman Empire. Wow. How did you get from Bad Janet Jen Psaki and CNN's biased reporting to the fall of the Roman Empire? Well, they're connected. They are certainly connected. They are certainly connected. They are certainly absolutely connected. They are certainly connected. We are living in a period in which capitalism is in a state of collapse in what you can call the West. Neutral Janet is more appropriate. She sounds like a robot and is not necessarily complicit in evil, but is part of the pencil pushing. All right, we'll write that down. Neutral Janet is more appropriate. I will address that during the Q&A. We are living in a period when capitalism is in decline in the West, or the so-called West. When you talk about NATO, the NATO countries, when you talk about the United States and Britain and Australia and Canada, the Anglosphere, we are living in the period of a collapse. March 15th is approaching. And March 15th is a very important day in the history of the Roman Empire. March 15th is the day that Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by the Roman senators. And I've given various talks on this before. I've given presentations about the fall of the Roman Empire. But I will say that it becomes more and more relevant each day. I look at some of the presentations I gave. I gave a talk, Is America the New Rome and Will It Fall? I look back on that talk and I think I could have done a much better job. Now, so much has happened. I could give that talk much better in our time, because what I was talking about has become more and more true and more apparently true than ever before. First of all, the fall of the Roman Empire was not a good thing. The fall of the Roman Empire was not a good thing. And everyone recognizes this. And there's probably some people here that are angry and they hear me say that and they're like, how, Caleb, the Roman Empire was an abomination. They had slavery. They oppressed people all across the known world, all across Europe, North Africa, Asia. They were persecuting people, the Middle East. They were awful. Yes, yes. The Roman Empire was awful. But the fall of the Roman Empire made conditions worse. As a result of the fall of the Roman Empire, the life expectancy of humans drastically decreased. The average height of human beings went down by several inches, by 1 to 2 inches. People were shorter as a result of the fall of the Roman Empire. Furthermore, the population of Europe drastically went down. Europe began depopulating. The population of Europe did not reach what it was at the height of the Roman Empire for 1,100 years. For 1,100 years, it took Europe to restore the level it was at the height of the Roman Empire. All right. Fuckers are losing. Horse. Very good. Wrote it down. BLM protests were used by a section of the ruling class against Trump. Wrote it down. Very good. All important topics. It took 1,100 years for Europe to reach the population level it had at the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was awful, and it's very easy to admire Spartacus for his great slave uprising against the Roman Empire. And it's very easy to admire the zealots of ancient Palestine and their uprisings against the Roman Empire, to admire the Celtic warriors who fought against the Romans. The Roman Empire was evil and oppressive and barbaric, but the fall of the Roman Empire did not benefit humanity. And this is a really important thing to remember. Just because something is bad does not mean that what replaces it will necessarily be better. And what came to replace the Roman Empire was not better. The fall of the Roman Empire resulted in conditions getting worse throughout Europe. Life expectancy went down, population went down, living conditions deteriorated. The fall of the Roman Empire did not lead to something higher than the Roman Empire. It led to deterioration and conditions worsening. And that's why Rosa Luxemburg, in her very important pamphlet about World War I, warned that imperialism and capitalism in its monopoly stage, imperialism and the imperialist wars might lead to a similar situation in Europe, that there was no guarantee that Western capitalism, when it collapsed or when it fell, would be replaced by a higher mode of production called socialism. It was very possible that Western capitalism in its monopoly stage could fall and degenerate into something lower, something more primitive, and something more barbaric. And that's what happened when the Roman Empire fell. The Roman Empire was replaced by something more primitive and more barbaric. And it took about a millennium, over a millennium, 1,100 years for Europe to reach the population level that it had had. The fall of the Roman Empire didn't benefit people. It didn't make their lives better. You can be against the Roman Empire, but you can recognize that what replaced the Roman Empire was not good. And the main reason that the Roman Empire fell is because slavery is a very inefficient system of production. The Roman Empire was founded on slavery, people owning other people. And when people own other people, you don't really have a very strong motivation to work. Now, slavery in a small context, like in a household context, where there's one person, one landowner who owns 5 or 6 slaves, there might be some motivation to work, right? Because the slaves, they benefit from what the household has all overall. But when you have a huge mine, or where people are being worked to death, like the Romans have, when you have huge plantations where people are being worked very hard growing crops, there's almost no motivation for a slave to work. The only motivation that a slave has to work is to avoid being punished. Right? The slave, if they don't work, they might get beaten. If they don't work, they might get deprived of food. But that's about it. There's nothing to gain for the slave. The slave has nothing to gain from working. And so of course, in Roman slavery, they would have to have a slave whose job it was to boss around the other slaves. And of course, that's not exactly the most pleasant jobs. And so that slave would have to get some better treatment, in order to make him do his job. And then you'd have to have another slave whose job it was to tell the slave whose job it was to tell people what to do. And the bigger the Roman Empire got, the bigger their mines got, the bigger their plantations got, the more inefficient slavery became. The Romans, they made metal tools, swords, weapons, spears that they used. They made them from metal that they had extracted from the earth in mines. They grew crops to eat with. And for the most part, the more slaves they got, the more the empire expanded, the less and less productive and efficient the empire became. Their productive capacity and their efficiency in putting out goods was constantly decreasing throughout Roman history. The bigger the Roman Empire got, the weaker and weaker the industrial output became. More and more slaves produced less and less products. What the Romans did is, the way their empire worked is they went around different parts of the world, and they went to ancient kingdoms, and they would seize them, and they would force them to pay tribute. The Romans were the middleman in the global market. There's an expression, all roads lead to Rome. And what that referred to was the Romans would not allow any roads in their empire connecting one section of the empire to the other. All roads must lead to Rome. They were the global middleman in trade. And every place that they had conquered, they forced to pay tribute. They forced them to send so many slaves to Rome. They forced them to send so many crops to Rome. They forced them to send so many swords and weapons and tools to Rome. And they were extracting from the various places they had conquered and forcing the people to pay tribute. And they were maintaining a monopoly. They were the middleman. All trade went through them. You could not trade unless you went through the Romans. They were the middleman. And that's how the Romans tended to operate. They conquered Gaul, which is modern day France. They conquered the Britons. They went all the way up to Hadrian's Wall, right? All the way up into modern England. They conquered North Africa. In Tunisia, what is now Tunisia, there was a city-state called Carthage. And the city-state of Carthage, they had a war with the Romans, and they were defeated. They had several wars with the city-state of Carthage. Carthage was a rival empire. Carthage was trying to do the same things the Romans were doing, trying to, control trade routes, etc. And there's the very famous story of Hannibal, the leader of Carthage, who crossed the Alps with elephants, and it was very famous. But Carthage was defeated by the Romans. And when the Romans defeated Carthage, they enslaved all the people there. And then, to make sure that never again could Carthage become a center of opposition to Rome, they took sea salt, like evaporated seawater. They took sea salt and they ground it into the soil to make sure that no crops could be grown. You can't grow crops in soil that is full of salt. And so the Romans plowed salt into the earth to make sure that Carthage could never again become fertile ground for growing crops, and that there would never again be a civilization in Carthage. Very famous, right? Rome was a backward empire, and it was founded on holding back history. Many of the places that Rome conquered were actually starting to adopt a higher mode of production. So feudalism is different than slavery. Slavery, the slave doesn't get anything, right? He gets enough food to survive. He works out of fear of punishment. The slave doesn't get nothing, doesn't get anything. Feudalism is different than slavery. In feudalism, the peasant or the serf, they work the land, and then they give to the landowner, the noble or the landowner, their tax or their obligation or their rent. They give it to the landowner, but then they get to keep whatever is left over. So a serf or a peasant has far more motivation to work than a slave does. And feudalism is a much more efficient way of running an agrarian economy than slavery. And many of the places that Rome was conquering, many of these kingdoms, were starting to move toward feudalism. They were starting to grow crops, etc. And the Romans were conquering them and forcing them to send their people as slaves, forcing them to, give some of the crops they were producing. And essentially, Rome was maintaining its backward economic system by going around and functioning as the middleman and threatening the rest of the world with military equipment, with their swords and with their spears. They were going to places that actually had more advanced technology than they did, and a more advanced economic system, and they were pointing spears at them, and they were kind of maintaining their backward slave economy by extracting from people who were actually starting to get more advanced. And the Greeks had made great advances. The Persians had made great advances in science and mathematics. The Romans weren't doing that. They were going around the world extracting from those who had made great advances. However, and this is very important, Rome is also the place that the greatest class in all of history was born. It is in Rome that we first got the proletariat. Why is it, we talk about the working class, the capitalist class, the workers and the bosses. Are you cold, forlorn, and hungry? Are there lots of things you lack? Is your life made up of misery? Dump the bosses off your back, right? We talk about the workers and the bosses, the class struggle. Well, the proletariat, why do we talk about proletarians? Why do we talk about proletarians? Where does the term proletarian come from? Well, the word proletarian literally means one who has children. That's what it means. In Latin, it referred to the proletariat or the proletari were those who had children. And what it meant was they didn't own any property. In Rome, you had patricians and plebeians, and they were property owners. Patricians were people who had been there from the beginning. Plebeians were people who kind of came in later. They weren't, but they were property owners. If you were a patrician or a plebeian, you owned property. And there were slaves in Rome. And if you were a slave, you were owned by someone else. A Roman, a patrician, or a plebeian owned you. However, the proletarians owned nothing but their labor power. Arab Spring protests about spiking food prices. Right. Wrote it down. Owned nothing but their labor power. The proletarian did not own any land. The proletarian did not own any slaves. The proletarian only owned his children. And the word family, familia, that was Latin. It referred to the fact that, a man, everything a man in Rome owned, he was considered his familia, including his wife and his kids, also his slaves, also his land, also his household. The total of a man's property was his familia. And the proletarians, their familia, a proletarian man, had nothing but his children. Nothing. Nothing but his children. And that's what a proletarian is. A proletarian is one who has children. That's what it literally meant. And it referred to a group of people that started coming into Rome who did not own any land, did not own any slaves, but were not slaves themselves. No one owned them, but they didn't own anybody else, and they didn't own any land. They were men of no property. They were men of no property. They were proletarians. And who were the proletarians? Well, the proletarians were largely people who had a skill that a slave couldn't do. You know, if you wanted to grow crops, you had a slave do that. You wanted to mine from the earth, you had a slave do that. However, a proletarian, you needed a proletarian to be a blacksmith. You couldn't just grab some random slave and tell him to, you know, start making swords out of iron. You couldn't do it. You couldn't just grab some random slave and tell him, all right, you know, lay out the bricks for this new building we're building. He wouldn't know what he was doing. But a bricklayer, a mason, that's a skilled craft. So you have to hire somebody who knows what they're doing, right? A pipe fitter, someone to do plumbing, right? In Rome, you started to see the beginnings of plumbing, someone who knows how to make plumbing. Again, you'd have to have somebody who knows what they're doing, a skilled craftsman. So you have to have a proletarian do that. You have to hire somebody. You can think of other skilled crafts, blacksmithing. There are many, many of these. Doctors, physicians, right? You can't just grab some slave and say, all right, I'm sick, heal me. He wouldn't know what he was doing. But a physician from Greece or a physician from ancient Persia, that was somebody who could do it. So a proletarian in ancient Rome was somebody who had a skill that could not be done by a slave. Carpenters, that was a very important type of proletarian. You had carpenters, right? You know, they were cutting wood. You know, they were skilled with wood. You couldn't just grab some random slave and say, all right, start cutting wood for me. He wouldn't know what he was doing. But a carpenter, that's a skilled trade. The proletarians were craftsmen in ancient Rome. And when proletarians started to become the majority of the population in Rome, Roman society started changing. When hired labor, wage labor, became the dominant, it wasn't the dominant, but became prominent within the city of Rome. The prominent mode of production was slavery, but when you had hired wage laborers in Rome, that's the first place in history that we had a population of many, many hired wage laborers. You started to have things that you'd never had before in history. Homelessness, for example. They didn't have homelessness. Slaves are never homeless. They have a place to stay all the time. Peasants are never homeless. They have a place to stay all the time. But proletarians, if they can't get enough work, they can't pay their rent in the place that they're living, and pretty soon they're out on the street. And so in Rome, people from the world, all these kings that would visit Rome, they would be shocked. All right. Wrote it down. They would be shocked. They would just be utterly shocked to see that Rome was this great city, this wealthy city, the capital of the world, the capital of the empire that dominated the known world. But they would go to this city and they would see crowds of desperately poor, people with ripped up clothes, barely any clothes on, running around. It was the weirdest thing. They said, how is it that Rome can be the center of the world? And yet it's full of desperate, poor people. The streets are full of people begging for food. How is this possible? It's possible because in a system of wage labor, you could have unemployment. There had never been unemployment before. But in Rome, you had unemployment. In Rome, you had homelessness. And there was an epidemic in Rome of homeless children. All over Rome, there would be homeless children on the streets running around, right? Their parents were proletarians, couldn't take care of them. And it was the weirdest thing. Rome started to have crowds of unemployed people and hungry people. And some Roman politicians, and to be a Roman politician, to be a Roman senator, that was hereditary, that was a title, but to be part of the Roman National Assembly, to be elected, you had to be a landowner. But some Roman politicians realized that they could gain political power by becoming champions of the proletarians. You had the Gracchi brothers, the Gracchi brothers. They were famous for this, right? And they called them populares, which is like populists. And they would build a group of proletarians. They would hand them bread and feed them, and they would walk around the city of Rome, and they would have a big crowd of proletarians with them, listening to their speeches, and they would be on their side. And when it was time, when there was some kind of political debate, they would bring their mob of proletarians, and their mob of proletarians would kind of fight on their behalf. And it was a way of gaining power. It was a way of gaining power in Rome among the politicians, was to be a populare, to be a populist. And this is what we would now call Bonapartism. One section of the elite using the proletariat to push back against another section of the elite. And that started happening in ancient Rome. You had the populares, the populists, and it would be one Roman wealthy landowner would mobilize a mob of proletarians to push his agenda. Another Roman politician would mobilize his people to get his, to get what he wanted. And we started seeing the proletariat brought into politics, right? You couldn't bring slaves into politics. They belonged to somebody, right? But proletarians who were unemployed, who were hungry, who were looking for work, could be brought into politics. And it's in Rome that we see the very, very beginnings of a proletarian movement. The wage laborer wants higher pay, wants better treatment on the job, wants shorter hours. He wants to be more able to provide for his family. So the proletarian, this craftsman of ancient Rome, suddenly is going to support politicians who will help him. And he's going to not support politicians who won't help him. And we start to see the very beginning of what we're doing now. What thousands of years later, 2,000 years later, Karl Marx was writing about in the Communist Manifesto, the world to win, nothing to lose but your chains. The proletarian movement started in Rome. The proletarian movement began in ancient Rome. The very, very beginning of the proletarian movement happened in ancient Rome. The very beginnings of it. And it was a very good book Michael Parenti wrote called The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome, shows that Julius Caesar represented the city building tendency in the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar was one of these populists, one of these these populares. He was a landowner. He was a wealthy military leader. He was a populare. And Julius Caesar fought for the proletarians. He was elected as the imperator of Rome. He had great victories on the battlefield. He defeated Tunisia. He defeated Gaul. He conquered a lot of people. He expanded the Roman Empire. He was kind of a hero. So in Rome, Julius Caesar became very prominent in politics, and he was elected as the imperator, the military leader of the city, or the head of state in Rome. But he wasn't the king. Right? Rome was a democracy. They had a Senate that was hereditary. It was, if you'd been in the city, it was all the families that had started Rome. They had a seat in the Senate. And then you had the National Assembly, where landowners elected. I'd talk to him, sure. If he'd talk to me, sure. They elected the National Assembly. And the National Assembly elected the imperator. And the imperator was kind of a figurehead, the head of state. And Rome, like Athens or some of the Greek city-states, it maintained a vaguely democratic model. If you were a landowner, you got to vote. The Senate elected people. And why did Rome do this? Why did Rome have a quote-unquote democracy? Why was Rome a republic? I shouldn't say democracy. Why did Rome have a republic? Why? The reason that Rome had a republic was because it was much easier to motivate people to build an empire if they got a say, right? You had all these different families that owned land, and they all wanted to get a share of the spoils. Rome was going around the world colonizing and seizing, territory and taking over different places. And if they got a say, right, if every rich family got a vote, then they were much more likely to want to see the empire expand. If Rome had been an absolute monarchy at the beginning, it would never have expanded as much, because everything would have just gone to the emperor, and then the other ruling families wouldn't have really gotten that much. But having a quote unquote democracy is a way to bring people in to the job of building an empire. You know, if this family got a vote, if your family got a vote, and you got to vote on how the spoils of the empire were divided up, you would be much more likely to want to build the empire. And the Roman Republic was a mechanism for ensuring that all the wealthy families, all the landowning families of Rome would be motivated to go build the empire. And that was a very, very important part of why Rome was a republic. It was a republic because the republic was a mechanism for maintaining an efficient empire. But the Roman Republic fell. The Roman Republic fell. And it collapsed. And Rome was not able to be a republic for very long. The Roman Republic ultimately collapsed. It fell. And the way the Roman Republic fell is that Julius Caesar, the imperator, the populare, deserve respect for their home. Downtrodden people ought to learn. People, the imperator Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was becoming extremely popular. The proletarians loved him because he was enacting popular reforms. He was imposing wealth taxes on the rich, and he was building public libraries, which nowadays people might not think very much of public libraries. They might think, okay, that's a place I can go read the computer, maybe check out a nice book. In Rome, it was very different. In Rome, a public library gave people access to written records, right? If you were a proletarian and your employer was mistreating you, and there was a law that said they had to pay you by a certain date, the only way you could find out about it was by going to a public library. And if you didn't have access to those records, there was no way you could point toward the law, right? And that the libraries, the public libraries that Julius Caesar existed, were a way of giving people access to public records, to history, to procedures, to important information. And it granted the proletariat the ability to get access to information, public libraries, public records. Also, Julius Caesar proceeded to enact policies of land redistribution. He started distributing land to proletarians and giving proletarians a chance to actually own land and stop being proletarians. He, created a mechanism for social mobility where, generally it was if your parents had been patricians or if your parents had been plebeians, you own land, and if you'd never owned any land, well, you're screwed. Well, he started redistributing some of the land. And then Julius Caesar came out with a plan, and this is the most important thing. Julius Caesar came out with a plan to grant citizenship to people in cities around the empire. He said that the empire, if it was going to function, if the Roman Empire was going to function, it couldn't just be centered around one city, that they needed to make Athens a center of trade, and they needed to make Alexandria a center of trade. And they needed to have city-states around the Roman Empire that also prospered. Julius Caesar wanted multipolarity for the Roman Empire. He said, if Rome is going to continue to get rich and our empire is going to be sustainable, we need to start taking some of these cities like Athens and some of these cities like Alexandria, some of these cities like Persepolis in Persia, Jerusalem, and we need to start building them up to be prosperous centers of trade also. And in order to do that, we need to give a vote to the people in those cities. The people in those cities need to be able to vote for who is the emperor. or for who is the senator, or who is the National Assembly, not the senators and not the emperor. There was no emperor at this time. This was a republic. The idea was to give the vote to the various people in these cities. Julius Caesar was a city builder, and he realized that the whole world being centered around one city is not a sustainable program for growth. It wasn't. It's not a sustainable program for growth. That you needed to have various city-states. We're getting to that. We're getting to that. In the Roman Empire. And so he put forward this plan to give the vote to people throughout the empire, to different ethnic groups, to different city-states. And then he also wanted to hire the proletarians, thousands of unemployed proletarians, and send them throughout the empire to Athens, to Alexandria, to Gaul. He wanted to send them throughout the empire to start building up these cities, build beautiful cities throughout the Roman Empire. He was a city builder. And that was his vision, was that Rome would not simply be the only city, that the Roman Empire would become part of a network, a trade network, something like what eventually happened with the Silk Road, right? That Rome would be one outpost, and there would be another city that was also beautiful and prosperous, and there would be another city that was also beautiful and prosperous, and that the Roman Empire would cease to be centered around one city, and it would be part of a global network of cities cooperating with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation. Basically, Julius Caesar was putting forward some kind of like 44 BC version of the One Belt, One Road initiative of China. That's basically what he was trying to do. He said, the Roman Empire, the way we're operating is not sustainable. We're holding back progress around the world. We're becoming less and less efficient. We need to change our relationship with the world. And he funded a lot of art and a lot of science. He brought in a lot of doctors. He promoted literacy among the proletarians, teaching the proletarians to read. He was a progressive in a barbaric, reactionary empire. Julius Caesar was a progressive. And Julius Caesar was awful in many ways. He was a slave owner. He was a barbaric conqueror. But one of the most interesting things about Julius Caesar, this is fascinating to me. Julius Caesar said, love your enemies and forgive your enemies. Because usually when Rome showed up and pointed spears at people, if they just surrendered, they were okay. However, if you were like Carthage in Tunisia and you fought the Romans, you were like the Gauls or the German barbarian, if you were one of these groups that fought back, the Romans would come down on you if they defeated you. They would murder, they would massacre all of you. Think about Spartacus after the slave revolt. They crucified thousands of slaves from all the way back to Rome. There were crucifixions, thousands of crucified people. All these slaves who had revolted were crucified along the road to Rome. It was barbaric. And the Romans were famous for wreaking ruthless, horrific revenge on people, right? Crucifixion was the punishment reserved for those who rebelled against the Roman Empire. They would nail you to a cross until you died. It was a horrendous, they were known for just torturing people to death. And if you rebelled against the Romans, if you fought a war against the Romans, they were ruthless to you. They took vicious revenge. And that was what made them famous. And that's what made them so feared, is that they wouldn't just kill you. They would torture you to death. They would crucify you. They would throw you into a pit of lions, and a crowd of people would watch you be eaten alive. You hear stories about, they would take people's children. This is horrific. They would take people's children and paint their bodies with honey. You ever heard of this? They would take children and paint their bodies with honey, and then throw them into an auditorium or into the Colosseum and have wild baboons rip their limbs to shreds. It was just horrendous stuff. The Romans were known for this cruel, sadistic revenge that they would impose on people. But then Julius Caesar came along And he said, I've got an idea. Why don't we forgive our enemies? He said, after we take over an area, after we win, why don't we forgive our enemies? After we conquer them, after they submit, why don't we say, you know what? We forgive you. Why don't we stop extracting brutal revenge on all the people we've had a war with? It'll probably be better for the empire if we forgive our enemies, forgiving their enemies. And he said, we need to learn to love our enemies. This is, it's very bizarre. But Julius Caesar was saying, basically, this practice we have of extracting brutal revenge against all the peoples we colonized, it hurts us in the long run because they grow up hating us. And then the next generation, about a generation later, there's another revolt against us, and we have to go and extract brutal revenge all over again. And it's this problem we have that every place that we go, we win a war, and then we cut a bunch of people's heads off, and we crucify a bunch of people, and we commit horrendous atrocities. And then the people there, they hate us. And then a generation later, they hate us more, and there's another war, and then we got a little bit of a problem. But what if we could go to these areas that we've conquered, and instead of extracting brutal revenge, what if we forgave them? And what if we economically developed them? What if we helped them to be a little bit more stable? What if we brought some of our scientific knowledge? What if we made these areas feel kind of like they were benefiting from being part of our empire? It's a wild proposal, right? It's not what one's primitive barbaric instincts would want. And you have to remember, in ancient Rome, these kind of feelings, this idea that one should forgive their enemies, these feelings were pretty new. You have to remember, Rome is named after Romulus, right? Romulus and Remus were two brothers. There were two brothers who were left, they were abandoned by their father, two twin brothers, they were abandoned by their father, left alongside of a river to die. And they were the founders of Rome. And the legend tells us that they were left by the river to die, and then Romulus and Remus were nursed by a she-wolf. A female wolf came and nursed them, and they suckled the teats of a female wolf, and they were literally raised by wolves. That's the Roman legend. Now, is it true? Probably not. But they actually had a statue in Rome of the two boys suckling the wolf. Right? It was kind of a symbol of the empire. That's how they began. And what was the message of the story? It was that the Romans were tough. They were tough. And they had foregone their humanity. They had become like wild predators. They'd been raised by wolves. They weren't held down by any of this coddling human. They were tough predators. That's what they were known for. And the Roman Empire was very much an empire founded on might makes right. They were tough predators, and they weren't held down by compassion and weakness. They practiced infanticide. They extracted ruthless revenge. The Romans prided themselves in their lack of humanity. And Two's Time is asking any thoughts on the UK Minister Truss's comments in Moscow. I haven't seen that, actually, Two's Time, so I can't comment on that. They prided themselves on their lack of humanity. Prided themselves on it. But after a while, after Rome had been the center of the known world for long enough, they started to get a little weary. And this is also interesting. Among the Romans, the primary school of thought was called hedonism. It was the idea that one should live for pleasure, and that whoever engages in if you achieve the highest form of pleasure in life, that is the greatest success. One thing Romans were notorious for doing was they would eat until they had stuffed themselves, and then they would vomit up all the food and go and eat some more. Now, some people say that that they had a room for doing this called the vomitory. That's not actually correct. The vomitories were were like in stadiums. They were like hallways in stadiums where people would leave. So it was like they were vomiting out of the stadium. It was where it was the exit of the stadium. So it wasn't called a vomitory. Whoever told you that that's technically not correct. They didn't have a special room for it. But the Emperor Claudius was very famous for the fact he had a servant. He would have these big parties, and there would be servants who stood next to him that had really long peacock feathers. And after he had eaten so much food that he was just so full of food, he would say to the servant, he would snap his fingers, servant, come over here. And he would open his mouth, and then the servant would stuff the feather down his throat and tickle his throat until he vomited up all of his food. And then he would go and eat more food. And the Emperor Claudius was famous for how fat he was. There were statues of him because he was so fat. And the Romans considered it a great achievement. This man could become so fat. It was like they were proud. Look at our leader. This is the fattest man who's ever existed. No one has ever been this fat. It was sickening. And the Romans really kind of had this attitude of hedonism, living for pleasure. There's a lot of gambling. They would bet on the chariot races. They would bet on gladiatorial shows. However, after a while, there started to become a new trend among the Romans, among the wealthy Romans and the landowners. There became a new trend. And that new trend was called Stoicism. And Stoicism was this belief that actually pleasure was not the highest good, and that strength comes from learning to endure hardship and learning to suffer. And the Stoicists got into some of these mystical cults, right? Throughout the empire, they're always bringing in gods from Egypt, gods from Persia, various gods to worship. And these gods that they would bring in would often have Romans engage in bizarre rituals, self-flagellation. That was a very common thing. And they would be worshiping some god like Osiris from Egypt or Isis, or they'd be worshiping Zarathustra from Persia, and they'd be worshiping this god, and they would have like a whip, and they would whip themselves to the point that they were bleeding, and blood would be pouring down their back, and they'd be thinking, oh, I'm gaining spiritual enlightenment from this, and they'd whip and flog themselves. And they would take drugs, hallucinogens, and they would start tripping on hallucinogens. They'd have mystical experiences, and they'd feel like they were getting closer to God. They were getting more spiritual. And that among the Romans who were starting to get weary of the hedonism and weary of the sadism and the cruelty and the revenge, you started to have this trend of people that they called the Stoicists. And the Stoicists had the opposite belief. They believed the hedonist wanted to maximize his wealth and eat as much as he possibly could. The Stoicist would starve himself so that he could be more mystical and pure. The hedonist lived for absolute pleasure. The Stoicist bragged about how much he had suffered. Some of the Roman comedies make fun of the Stoic philosophers because they were hucksters. They were con men. And these Stoic philosophers like Seneca was the most famous of the Stoic philosophers, was going around telling everyone, oh, you shouldn't have wealth. You should learn the beauty of being poor. And by going around telling people to be poor, he would charge people lots of money to come to his lectures. And Seneca was one of the greatest hypocrites in Rome because he was going around telling all these wealthy Romans, you should be poor. And they would be, yes, poverty is beautiful. And then they would give him all their money. And he lived in luxury by going around telling people to be poor. And there were Roman comedies making fun of this because it was the silliest thing, right? And that there are some people, there's always been a section among the rich that in their wealth, they feel guilt. They feel some kind of guilt about the fact that they live in luxury while most of the world lives in poverty. So they're looking for someone to come along and help them suffer, someone to come along and punish them and guilt trip them and make them feel more spiritual, right? And that exists up to today, right? You have that up to today. You have sections of the rich that indulge in their guilt and are looking for various con men and charlatans to help assuage them of their guilt and help them suffer and learn what real truth is. This is a trend that existed. the Stoicists and the hedonists. But Julius Caesar was neither a Stoicist or a hedonist. Julius Caesar was a city builder. Julius Caesar believed that Rome had to turn around, that the way the Roman Empire was operating could not function any longer. And if they were going to survive, they needed to start empowering the people. They needed to start redistributing the wealth. They needed to start promoting science and education. They needed to build infrastructure. And that Julius Caesar, this general, this imperator within a brutal, barbaric, reactionary empire, American workers, the legacy of Stoicism. All right. In this brutal, reactionary empire, something progressive could happen. And Julius Caesar aligned himself with the proletarian movement. He became the champion of the proletarians. Became the champion of the proletarians. He fought for the rights of the proletarians. He made the wealthy Roman senators very, very nervous. They were terrified of him. And so they had an idea. This is really wild. The wealthy Romans, they said, the way that we're going to get Julius Caesar to not be a threat to us is we're going to make him the king, right? That the reason he's rallying all these proletarians is he wants power. So if we just make him permanently the king, we won't have to worry about him anymore. So there were 3 different occasions where Julius Caesar was in the Roman Forum, where there's a lot of people buying and selling the marketplace. He was in the Roman Forum, and the senators and the wealthy people got a crown. And they got this crown, and they marched toward Julius Caesar, and they offered him the crown. And they said, we're going to make you the king. And their thinking was, he won't want to be so powerful. He'll stop helping the proletarians. Just put the crown on his head. He can be in charge. And then he'll stop all these progressive reforms because he won't need power anymore. 3 times, the wealthy Romans, the senators, walked up to Julius Caesar with a crown. They walked toward him holding a crown. 3 times, he pushed the crown away. And he said, I don't want to be the king. 3 times. First, they tried to bribe him. They tried to make him the king as a way of stopping him. But each time he pushed the crown away. And when he would push the crown away, the crowd of proletarians, the crowd of working people, with nothing to sell but their labor, would burst into applause. And they would cheer for him louder than they had ever cheered before. To see him push the crown away and say, I don't want to be the king. That made Julius Caesar more powerful than they could ever imagine. The proletarians saw him as their champion. He was a champion of the people. He didn't want to wear a crown. He didn't want to wear a crown. And on 3 occasions, they tried to put a crown on his head. And on 3 occasions, he pushed the crown away. And the proletarians burst into applause, cheering for this man who did not want to be king, who didn't want to be king. He wanted to be their champion. He wanted to fight for their rights, and he didn't want to be their king. And after Julius Caesar pushed the crown away 3 times, on 3 different occasions, he pushed the crown away. That's when the senators got together and they said, we're going to kill this motherfucker. We're going to kill this son of a bitch. So they gathered and they plotted to assassinate Julius Caesar. And it was on the Ides of March. It was on the Ides of March, 44 BC. March 15th, 44 BC. Julius Caesar woke up and decided he was going to go give a speech to the senators. Decided he was going to go give a nice speech to the senators. And his wife said to him, "I've had a horrible dream and you should not go. Don't go." And he said he had no interest in her womanish superstitions, so he went anyway. And the story goes, the legend goes, that there was a soothsayer, a mystic, a fortune teller, who had told Julius Caesar, beware the Ides of March. And Julius Caesar also passed this same soothsayer, who a few days before had said, beware the Ides of March. And as he was walking to the Senate, he saw the soothsayer who had told him, beware the Ides of March. And he said to the soothsayer, you told me to beware the Ides of March. Well, the Ides of March are here. I'm doing fine. Ha, 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 ha. And kind of taunted the soothsayer who told him to beware the Ides of March. And the soothsayer said to him, the day is still young. And he rolled his eyes and laughed it off. And then Julius Caesar came to the Senate. And as he stood before a statue of Pompey, the senators stabbed him to death. They pulled out their knives and they stabbed him to death. And they stabbed him over and over and over again. And it was almost like an honor. They didn't have to stab him that many times. They didn't have to. But it was almost like the senators, they all wanted to be in on it. They all hated him so much for the fact that he had fed the people, the fact that he was threatening their monopoly on power, the fact that he was talking of redistributing land, the fact that he wanted to give citizenship to peoples throughout the empire. And even though it only took, you only have to stab somebody in the back 5 or 6 times before you kill them. But all of them, they all just wanted to sink those knives into his, just continue stabbing him to death. And they stabbed him over and over and over again. The story goes that Mark Antony stabbed Caesar to death. Mark Antony was the leader of the conspiracy to kill Julius Caesar. But also, Julius Caesar was stabbed by Brutus. Right? And that Brutus had been a good friend of Julius Caesar's. The story goes that he said, Et tu, Brute, you also, Brutus, stabbed him to death. And Julius Caesar was stabbed to death on the floor of the Roman Senate, standing in front of the statue of Pompey. And of course, after Julius Caesar was killed, at that point, there were riots. There was a riot among the proletarians. The people of Rome rebelled. The proletarians burned things and they tore up the city. He was cremated. They built a funeral pyre for him. And the mob of proletarian people, the working class, are the ones who cremated him. A spontaneous mob assembled that they built this fire, this funeral pyre in the middle of the city, and they cremated Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was stabbed to death. And then he was killed. But almost immediately after he died, a civil war started, because who was going to replace Julius Caesar? Mark Antony was hoping to replace Julius Caesar. He'd been the leader of the conspiracy to kill Julius Caesar. So Mark Antony was hoping that he could become the leader of the Roman Empire. But then Julius Caesar, who'd been widely loved, he had an adopted son named Octavian. And Octavian also wanted to become the leader of the empire. So there was a big civil war. And Mark Antony lost. And Octavian won. And Octavian changed his name to Caesar Augustus. And Octavian became the first emperor of Rome. At that point, the Roman Republic was done. And Octavian became the first emperor of Rome. That was the end of the Roman Republic. And Octavian proclaimed that his father, his adoptive father, was a god, was a man god. And he built a temple. This is very fascinating. He built a temple. Built a temple to his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. And that temple that he built was the temple of Julius Caesar. It's fascinating. The temple, there was a temple, and for a little while after Julius Caesar died, they believed Julius Caesar had become a man god. And in addition to that, the son of Julius Caesar, the adoptive son, Octavian, who took on the name Caesar Augustus, he started referring to himself as the son of God. The son of a god is how he referred to himself. Pretty interesting. He started walking around saying, I'm the son of a god. And from then on, Rome had an emperor. It did not have a republic. The Senate existed, but it was pretty symbolic. And they had an emperor. And the emperor was believed to be a man god. And Rome continued to deteriorate. It's very famous, fascinating history, the fall of the Roman Empire. But the reason that March 15th is a holiday is because I believe that we are entering a moment like March 15th in the United States. If we can't turn around, if we can't start to become city builders within this dark reactionary empire, we can't start to do something good, we can't start to change the way we are operating in the United States, if we can't abandon hedonism and stoicism, if we can't become city builders in the United States, if we can't start empowering people around the world, if we can't start trading with people on the basis of win-win cooperation, if we can't embrace multipolarity, if we can't embrace science, if we can't embrace human intelligence, if we can't embrace historical progress, we will suffer the same fate as Rome. And it will lead, if the United States collapses, yeah, I know we're supposed to all love that, right? Burn it down, burn it down. Come on now. The United States collapses into Mad Max, kind of a Mad Max scenario. That's not good for nobody. Not good for nobody. And we in the United States are headed on a course toward collapse, depopulation, and barbarism. The only way out is the city building tendency. We need to embrace historical progress. We need to advance human history and human civilization. The city building tendency needs to emerge within the United States, not the destructive, pessimistic left, not the greedy, heartless, individualist, cruel right wing, but the city building tendency. The proletarian movement must reassert itself in the United States because it will be the working class who leads to historical progress. The only class that points to the way out of the nightmare facing Western capitalism is the proletariat. It is only because of the proletariat that Russia became a modern industrial superpower. It is only because of the proletariat that China became the second largest economy in the world. Only the proletariat, only the working class can point the way out of the disaster we are facing. It is only those with nothing to lose but their chains and a whole wide world to win. The proletariat. It is only the proletariat that can offer a way out of this nightmare. It is time for the proletariat to take up its historic mission and seize control of the means of production on behalf of all of society and organize the economy rationally to serve public good and not the profits of a few. It is time for the banks, factories, and industries and all the centers of economic power to be functioning rationally in the service of the people. And as we face a crisis, there are going to be populares in the ruling class. You're going to have your Donald Trumps and you're going to have your Bernie Sanders. And there are going to be different factions in the ruling class. And my question is, where is Julius Caesar? Where is Julius Caesar? Because there will be a city builder who emerges from within the American elite. There will be somebody within the American elite, some kind of Bonapartist figure who, for their own reasons, enters an alliance with the proletariat. There's going to be a Roosevelt. There's going to be an Abraham Lincoln. Might be a man, might be a woman, might be white, might be black, might be Asian, might be Latino, might be someone in the military. It'll probably be someone in the military. I'm just being real with you. It's probably going to be somebody in the military, but it might not be. Might be a political figure, might be a wealthy person, a very wealthy capitalist. There's going to be a figure within the ruling class who emerges. And enters a strategic alliance with the proletariat and with the anti-imperialist countries, who supports China, who supports Russia, who wants to make the United States a stronger country in terms of building infrastructure and science, etc., embraces multipolarity. There's going to be a figure within the US elite who will emerge that will be our Julius Caesar. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know who it will be. I don't know where they will come from. But it is the inevitable result of the conditions we are facing. Amid the Bonapartist struggles of the ruling class, some kind of progressive city-building Bonapartist will emerge. And when that figure emerges, it will be the duty of the proletariat to align with them, to demand more from them, to force them to become more radical, to be the foot soldiers that they need, but also to not let them be co-opted and not let them fall into the illusions of the old system. It will be our duty to enter a strategic alliance with the city-building tendency as it manifests itself within U.S. society. And it won't be easy, and it'll be difficult. And this person will probably start out sounding pretty right-wing and pretty reformist. But just like Lincoln said he didn't want to end slavery, just like Roosevelt's first term was not very good, just like Hugo Chavez got elected saying he didn't believe in capitalism or socialism, just whatever was best for Venezuela, this person, this figure will emerge, and it will be our duty to support them and to fight off their rivals within the ruling class. And it will be our duty to become the most important figures in the coalition, to make them dependent on us, to make them understand that only the proletariat can rescue society from capitalism. It'll be our duty to point them away from the trap of reformism, and it'll be our duty to pull this figure into a socialist and revolutionary and anti-imperialist mode. And it will be very difficult, and it may not work, but it better work, because that's really the only way out of this mess. And that's why March 15th is City Builders Day. The Ides of March. The Ides of March is a holiday for the Center for Political Innovation. That's why. That is why. So there you go. And that is what I have to share with you this afternoon. So March 15th will be City Builders Day. March 12th, we're going to have a really awesome event that's going to be in Austin, Texas. So if you want to donate to help that event happen, Jackson Hinkle's going to be there. Peter Coffin's going to be there. Samira Khan's going to be there. It's going to be awesome. So if you can donate down below in the YouTube, that would be awesome. And yes, folks, the city building tendency will emerge. Where is Julius Caesar? Where is Julius Caesar? Where is Julius Caesar? We shall see. So there you go, folks. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us today? Who's with us? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Who's with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Who's with us? All right. We've got Nadia in East Harlem, Nate in Chicago, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Micah from Las Vegas, Maupin Time in Scotland, Char Darling in Austin, Texas, Elias from Wisconsin, Deb in Mexico, Nick in California, Ryan in Oakland, Enoch in Australia, Max the Sax from the Belly of the Beast. Wow, I didn't know that. Richard, Christian in Bergen County, Radu Nikolai in Romania, Daniel in Oakland, Susan Brown in Rhode Island, Ottawa, Ontario, Tamiso, Minneapolis, Dario from Italy, Meredith and Quinn from Washington, Hugo from the Netherlands, Bartholomew from Odd, West Virginia, Detroit, Michigan, Albuquerque, Johan from Connecticut, Dario from Brooklyn, Eric from New Jersey, St. Louis, Bradley Wasser, Joshua Tree, California, Jose Gonzalez in Caracas, Venezuela, Ben in Denver, Everett in New Jersey, Detroit, Jonathan from Arkansas, CJ from CPI Chicago, Dylan in Bay Area, John in Houston, Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati, Bob Troy in New York, Rees from Adelaide, Australia, Daniel from Stuttgart, St. David's, Bermuda, Australia, Toei in Sweden, Balthazar in Oakland, Vinicius from Brazil, Kentucky, Kim from Jersey City, Steve Richter from Southwest Michigan, Ethan in New York, Jason in Chicago, Sam in Australia, Bendu in Delaware, American Autopsy, shout out to you. Kendall in San Diego, St. David's, Bermuda, Virginia, Smedley, Elias from Finland, Oregon, Cincinnati, Ohio, Randy from New England, Oregon, from Northeast Oregon, A Better America, Anti-Imperialism, Manchester, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Everett from New Jersey. Who else? There you go. Paul from Manchester, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, West Virginia, Redneck Red, Trevor from Ireland, Chrissy from Australia, Liam in Edinburgh, Scotland, Lane from Oregon, Carlos from South Texas, Minnesota, Birmingham, Seattle, Bayonne, New Jersey, Red Illuminati, American Futurist in Fresno, California. All right, folks, we're going to take that risk that we took last time. I'm going to do it. I am going to open up the chat. Now, the rules are, I'm posting the link right now. The rules are that I'm posting the link. And the rules are that if I can't see your face, I'm not bringing you on. And if people start acting silly, I'm shutting this down. I'm not doing it again. So there you go. I just posted the link on YouTube. I'm going to post it in the Rockfin. I'm going to bring people on. Julian from Southeast East UK is on the Rockfin. Very good. Kaladin is here. Susan from Austin, Texas is here. Awesome. I'm posting the link in the StreamYard. So if you want to come on for a little bit and say hi, we'll do that. And we'll answer super chats in between that. I'm opening up. I have to see your face if I bring you on, and if anyone starts acting a fool or acting silly, I just shut that down really quick and we stop doing that. But there we go. I posted the link. To the StreamYard in the YouTube chat, and in the Rockfin chat. So if you want to come on, you got a webcam. It doesn't work too well on your phone. So if you haven't come on yet, let's try to have folks who haven't come on yet. But if you want to hop on the StreamYard link, come on in and have a chat with me. I'll put you on the screen and you can say what you feel like saying. So if anyone wants to just hop on in, I'm posting the link one more time. There we go. If you want to just hop on in, you can do that. All right. But while we wait for someone to hop on in, we will start answering super chat questions. Someone super chatted me and said, neutral Janet is more appropriate. I don't see Jen Psaki as neutral. I mean, she tries to have a robotic neutral appearance, but I don't see her as neutral. At all. I'll just be real with that. All right. But I see we got Tom in Minneapolis. Robotic. Tom, what's happening? Oh, unmute yourself. You're muted. Unmute yourself.
Robotic. There you go.
Tom, what's happening?
Well, all right. What's happening? I'm here in Minneapolis.
Yourself. You're muted. Oh, I have to mute it over here. I have to mute myself now.
What's happening?
Well, all right.
What's happening? Can you hear me now?
You're muted.
Can you hear me
now?
I
have to mute your audio. We're echoing back here.
All right. What's that? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I have to mute your audio.
It's just confusing to me, Caleb. Maybe we
Tom,
should try another
mute
thing.
your computer because we're echoing back here.
It's just confusing to me.
There we go. All right. Oh no, you just muted yourself again. But yeah, if you can mute the audio on the program so we don't hear an echo, and then unmute yourself and talk, Tom. Okay. Can you do that? Okay. All right. Tom, you're muted. You're muted yourself. I can't hear you. But there you go.
Tom,
Tom, you're muted. Every time you're on mute, I hear the program. You need to mute the program, to silence the program.
Tom, you're muted.
All right, Tom. Well, if you can figure it out, we'll bring you back on. But Max the Sax, great longtime friend of the program. How is it going, Max?
It's going good, Caleb. Can you hear me?
I can absolutely hear you, Max the Sax. How's it going?
Good to hear. It's going very good, just winding down school, getting ready for college, getting ready to hit the streets on February 16th for the Alex Saab rally.
Yes, and it's going to be a wild rally on the 16th. There's going to be a demonstration here in New York City in Grand Central, I believe. Now, where is the demonstration in D.C. going to be for Alex?
It's going to be in front of the Justice Department building, I believe.
In front of the Department of Justice. Very good. And in Miami, there is going to be a big gathering outside the courtroom also, right?
Wow.
Yeah, so those are the three major rallies. But all around the country, different Center for Political Innovation people are doing something. And L.A., they're going to be doing something. In San Francisco, they're going to be doing something. In Oregon, they're going to be doing something. There's going to be Free Alex Saab is going to be the rallying cry of the country. There's Galesburg, Illinois. Can you believe this? Galesburg, Illinois is going to be having a small rally for Alex Saab. So it's going to be pretty wild. But yeah, what else is on your mind, Max?
It's just been a long day. Really good lecture on the Roman Empire. I didn't know about like some of the hedonist cults. It's interesting stuff. Kind of reminds me of BreadTube.
Yeah, the Stoicists. Yeah,
the Stoicists. Yeah,
definitely. I see class analysis. Ryan is saying the CPI will be at UN Plaza in San Francisco at 11 a.m. On 2/16 for the National Day of Action around Alex Saab. So that's going to be happening. But yeah, that Roman Empire stuff, it really speaks to me. And I feel like we need to popularize this. I have this idea of maybe making like a brochure that it's two-sided but you foldable about like Julius Caesar died for the people. What does that have to do with you, or something like that we can distribute and get people to understand this? It sounds like some complicated, crazy, esoteric history, but it's very, very relevant to what we're talking about. Wouldn't you say?
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely echoes between like Roman history and U.S. history. I think that's undeniable. And the weird thing is that the founders were very into like the Roman Empire aesthetic too. So it has a unique significance in America.
Oh, sure.
I think, too.
That's why so many buildings in D.C. have those pillars, just like ancient Rome. And also that's why upstate New York, all the places, they all have names that are like Roman. Like Syracuse and Cincinnati is named. Is a Roman general, Cincinnatus. So there you go. Any last thoughts, Max? Before there's a couple other people in line who want to come on. So
I'm just going to shout out. I'm a member of Students in Youth for New America, and you can find the youth wing of the CPI, which is Students in Youth for New America, on the CPI website. That is cpiusa.org/SYNA. That's it.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. All right. Thank you, Max. All my best. Shout out to you, Max the Sax, a skilled musician and political organizer in the DC area.
Thanks, comrades.
Great to have you on. And now, next, we've got Kendall in San Diego. Hey, Kendall.
Oh, hi, Caleb.
Hey, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to thank you for kind of the influence on my life and politics that you've had.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad. Tell me more.
And I was recommended this book from a friend, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, America's Way Out. And I read it, and it just made a lot of things make sense to me. That it gave me a vision for the future that was radically different than anything I had ever seen from a progressive person before. And it was a very profound shift in what I thought was possible. Because I had always been into like futurism, but I had been infected with the climate pessimism, with all of the I felt like there is no glorious future possible for us. And that kind of pulled me out of that. And I just wanted to thank you for a very profound shift in my attitude toward the state of the world.
Well, and thank you. I'm really glad that, you know, I'm really excited about what China is doing around fusion energy right now. There's just been some new breakthroughs in the last couple of days that are just utterly amazing. So, yeah, I mean, we need to be optimistic, you know. And that's kind of the old school way of thinking, but it's like I feel like it's kind of your obligation to be optimistic. You know what I'm saying? Even if things are difficult, even if bad things are happening, I'm really glad to know that I've had this impact on you, Kendall. Are there anything else you want to share with our audience?
No, I mean, buy this book, read this book. It's a great book. It's a very good book. Yep.
Sure. Well, I had a good time writing it for sure. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice day.
Yep. All right, that was great. And next we've got Evie. Hey, Evie, what's happening? I can't hear you, no. I'm not getting any audio from you, Evie. Okay, all right, very good. All right, well, we're gonna go back to answering some super chats. That was fun. That was fun. Good to hear from Max the Sax. Too bad it didn't work out with Tom and Evie, but you know, it worked with Max the Sax. It worked with Kendall from San Diego. That's awesome. Someone says that the truckers are bourgeois. The truckers are bourgeois because they own their own trucks. I disagree. I disagree. Now they are contractors, but many jobs do this now. I don't know if you realize this. Many jobs now, in order to avoid and avoid paying you a decent wage, they make you a contractor. That way they don't have to pay you minimum wage and stuff. So yes, they're renting themselves out, but they're a lot like Uber drivers. I mean, Uber drivers are contractors, right? From what I understand, they don't get paid an hourly wage. They get paid how many people pick them up. So it's like these truckers, yes, they're independent operators, right? You know, and the companies, you know, rent out their time. But at the same time, they are contractors. So I would not maintain that they are bourgeois. Well, all right, let's bring in Culloden. Hey, Culloden, how you doing?
Good. So I actually like wrote down the question that I had from the other stream because I was really nervous. So I wanted to ask you about. Sorry, my cat. I wanted to ask you about how exactly we, given the state of the current world, like the version of capitalism that we practice now, how exactly are we going to get to a socialist utopia? Because I really think that capitalism, it fulfills like an urge that we have to amass stuff. So we always want to get more stuff, and that is something. It's like I don't know if it's a biological thing, but having a lot of things is a way to attract a mate. So how exactly are we going to get rid of all of the politicians who have all the stuff and share it amongst everybody because they have so much power? And I know we have more people, but if you propagandize people for years and years and years, they don't know their power, which is exactly what is happening now. So basically I'm wondering, like, can you regulate capitalism? Can it be practiced effectively, or must it be abolished completely? And then who would make those regulations, and how can you make sure that everybody gets a piece of the pie? Because I believe in socialism. I think that it's a great goal to have, but people suck. And maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but I really need to know your thoughts.
It's fine. This is kind of the way, you know, this question reflects the way we're taught about socialism in the United States. I was taught in school. I remember I had a teacher who actually said that, you know, she said, well, what if I just gave everyone in the class a C? That would be socialism, right? Because, you know, if you get an A, you work hard, you get an A. And if you don't work hard, you get an F. But if I just gave everyone a C, that would be socialism. Or I was taught socialism means everyone gets paid the same wage. And this is obscuring what the whole thing is about. The problem with capitalism is that capitalism is a system of production organized for profit. It's, you know, under capitalism, goods are produced for profit, right? Under capitalism, we don't have houses because people need a place to live. We have houses so landlords and bankers can make money off of them. We don't have, food so that people can eat it. We have food so that, big box stores and agribusiness corporations can make money off of it. Capitalism is production organized for profit. And one of the problems with capitalism is that the more efficient production becomes under capitalism, the better technology gets, the better they get at producing products, the fewer people they need to hire. And as a result of hiring fewer and fewer people, poverty results from abundance, right? That people get poorer as a result of technology advancing. And eventually people can't buy back the products that are being produced. And you have what's called a glut, and it's overproduction, where they produce so much stuff and people are starving. We talk about, the coal miner's riddle. This coal miner, his son says to him, "Why is it so cold?" And he says, because I can't afford any coal to heat the home with. And he says, why can't you afford any coal? Because I lost my job at the coal mine. Why did you lose your job at the coal mine? Because there's too much coal, right? And that capitalism creates this situation where the more wealth you create, the poorer people get, right? And the only way to resolve that is to have production not be organized for profit, is to have the banks and the factories and the major centers of economic power functioning according to a central plan, a predetermined plan. So that they're not functioning according to the chaos of the market, and having society control the means of production, controlling the big banks, controlling the oil wells, controlling the big box stores, and organizing them and having kind of a central plan for the economy. You can then create a situation where the amount of wealth goes up and society also gets wealthier at the same time. People are not getting poorer as a result of that. So everyone's getting wealthier. As long as the pie is only this big, if the pie is only this big, the only way your slice can get any bigger is by cutting into someone else's slice. And no one ever thinks that their slice of the pie is big enough. However, if you can get the understanding that the pie can just continue getting bigger, right? And there's no limit to growth, right? Then at that point, you can start to have a society where people have more equal opportunities, right? And that there becomes less and less of a need to hoard, because if you're seeing your slice of the pie go bigger and bigger and bigger, why would you need to take from somebody else if you can just see it get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And that's why, for example, in China, there are many, many people, I believe until the pandemic, every day a new Chinese person was becoming a millionaire because of their socialist economy. They control the means of production. And by controlling the means of production, by planning out the economy, you can create a situation where the ability for wealth to be created can just expand. You don't have this problem of poverty being created by abundance. And that is the goal of socialism, is to eliminate that. And when you have a situation where the pie just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, as everyone starts to have enough, right, the differences between people start to then break down. Because people, there really becomes less and less of a need to take from somebody else or to hoard from somebody else, because everyone has enough. And that is the basis for, and when you talk about utopia, that's communism is the ultimate stage, right? It's the highest stage. And that is a society with so much wealth that there's no need for a government, that there's no social hierarchies of any kind, where people can just work because they feel like working. Where people can just, there's no division between mental and physical labor. And that is when technology has advanced so far beyond anything we can imagine. I think that would probably involve us like mining asteroids. That would probably involve us being on other planets. That would definitely involve getting beyond fossil fuels. I mean, fusion energy, probably something even higher than fusion energy. Communism is something that probably won't even come for maybe 1,000 years, but is very far off in the future. But the only way communism can be achieved, a total post-scarcity society can be achieved, is if we get rid of production for profit. We have to start organizing the economy not to serve profit, so that wealth does not create poverty. And that's the problem we have under our system right now, is the wealth creates poverty. And we need to create a situation where wealth can grow and poverty doesn't grow along with it. Does that make sense?
It does. But I guess, what would an actionable plan look like now? So, for example, if somebody wants to know, how do you deal with our government, for example? How, do you wait for them to die? What do you do? Do you guillotine them?
Put forward a program. And that's the important thing, right? It's not about supporting one politician over another. It's about putting forward a program, saying we want this, and developing a program, things that you advocate that will change society. And that's why we have this 4-point plan with the Center for Political Innovation. We are for a mass infrastructure program to rebuild the country. Hire unemployed people, put them to work rebuilding the country. We are for public control of banking and the lending of money. We are for public control of our natural resources like oil and gas, and that the wealth created by the land of the United States should belong to the people. It shouldn't belong to private companies. And an economic bill of rights, like Roosevelt put forward, like the right to a job, the right to health care. And building a movement around this program, around those four things, right, and demanding them, and going to politicians saying, are you for this or are you against it? Having demonstrations like the Medicare for All March, and having real program, things that people can actually see implemented. If you just say communism to people, that's something we can't even imagine. But if you put forward economic programs that people can see implemented, demanding them and building a movement around that program, right, that would eventually lead to political figures emerging who would help enact that program. And when that happens, when people are coming forward and rallying around that program, a leadership would be elected, but that leadership would have to deal with the fact that they still have our government, right? Our government isn't just the elected officials, it's the police, it's the military, it's the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, et cetera. And so that government would have to change the nature of the state, and they would have to start making a new police force that operated differently, and a new FBI, and a new military, and that they would change the nature of the state. And after on the basis of a program, we have a government that comes in and starts changing the nature of the state. That's what you call the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the second step. And once the dictatorship of the proletariat is enacted, at that point, then a new kind of government emerges that is a government that serves the people, that is at odds with the big corporations. And that government could then create socialism. But the main thing right now is the program. We need to get the program. People have it in their heads that they just have to pick among the politicians. Am I going to vote for this guy? Am I going to vote for that one? But instead, it needs to be about the program. We need our program to be everywhere. We need these four economic demands to be everywhere, to popularize these economic demands. That's kind of the vision of what needs to be done now. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation is doing, raising this 4-point plan everywhere as a way to challenge and say, why can't we do this? Why should big corporations get rich off our oil? Why should banking and private banking, run the economy? Why can't we have an economic bill of rights? And raising that and raising this program is a way to put into people's minds, building a movement around a program, I think is the way forward. And that could eventually lead to political leaders that would want to enact that program, that would then have to change the nature of the state. And then if the nature of the state changed, then we could fully have a fully socialist society. So that's kind of the vision. Is that helpful?
Yes. And that leads me to one more question. Do you think that the military can be like retrofitted to do something like that? Because I've discussed this with like a couple friends, and we were wondering if, like, let's say that you have somebody who has a campaign, and you would need, because the US is such a pro-military culture, you're not, something that I see in like mainstream left analysis is they just hate the military. So like you're not going to appeal to everybody by saying the military needs to go, blah blah blah. So instead, what can you make the military kind of that like jobs program that like makes jobs for people, and you can retrofit like bases to serve the populace around them rather than using them as launching points to go into Europe and all that stuff?
I think that we absolutely need to get over this hatred for the military, right? We can hate the wars that the military are sent to fight, absolutely. But no one's more anti-war than the military. I mean, these days, the military folks are the most anti-war. In fact, I mean, they're donating to like Tulsi Gabbard and Ron Paul and people like that. They're more anti-war than the population is. And the population is already very anti-war. And this attitude that we have to hate everyone who's in the military and call them a fascist or something, that needs to be completely gotten rid of. I have some stories I could tell. I don't think today is the time to tell them, but we need, and there are people in the military who love their country, right? Maybe they have some ideas that are wrong, and maybe they have some confusion. But there are some people who joined the military because they wanted to fight terrorism. They wanted to make sure nothing like 9/11 ever happened again. And those are the kind of people we need to appeal to. Now, as far as the military itself, the U.S. military, I don't think under the current leadership, the U.S. military would start acting that way. But never say never, right? I mean, in the Middle East, for example, it has been the military that has created socialism. In Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, it was the military. It was people within the military. They called them patriotic officers that took power and started building socialism. Now, that would be very difficult to do in the United States because our military is in an imperialist country. And the culture of the military is different. But I think there's a lot of rank and file people in the military that would really like what we have to say and are against the wars just like we are. So I hope that answers your question, Kaladin. And I thank you for coming on. And I hope we have you back on sometime soon. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yep. Very good. All right. So we got a couple other people lined up to come on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer one more super chat so I can get that. And then I'm going to bring on CJ from CPI Chicago. I'm going to bring him on next. So I'm going to answer this next super chat. Sections of the bourgeoisie used Black Lives Matter to protest Donald Trump. That is absolutely true. Absolutely. And you'll notice it's just like Me Too. You know, Me Too started because Donald Trump got elected. And we know Donald Trump is inappropriate and predatory with women. But then it ended as soon as Joe Biden got to the nomination, because Joe Biden, he raped Tara Reid. He's sexually assaulted women. He's creepy and sniffing the hair of little girls on videos. And the Joe Biden is a creeper. And so Me Too ended when Joe Biden got in there. And yes, the Democrats opportunistically use these movements. You can be sure of it. They use these movements for their own ends. Absolutely. And, just like the right wing used the Tea Party, and just like the right wing, they use various right-wing movements. Yes, the left wing of capital, George Soros, the big oil companies, the intelligence apparatus, they use left-wing movements. Absolutely. And that's why our attitude toward both of them needs to be, that we're doing something different. We're trying to put forward that socialism is the answer. We're trying to bring a socialist program like healthcare and jobs and education, like the 4-point plan. It can't be to just tail after these movements. Because that seems to be the attitude most left groups have. If there's something trendy that's left-wing, like Me Too or Black Lives Matter, they just tail after it. And if there's something right-wing, they just condemn it. Well, no, our attitude toward both should be to find those people that are in motion, that are angry about the injustices of this society, and show them that socialism is the answer and win them to our program. We have a transitional program, a 4-point plan, and that's the answer. When people are in motion, you approach them and you win them to socialism. And that is the answer, and that you shouldn't tail after left-wing movements. You shouldn't just blindly condemn right-wing movements. They're both wrong at the end of the day. The answer is socialism, and the way to build socialism is to rally people around our program of transition. All right, now I'm going to bring in CJ from CPI Chicago. Nice hat, CJ.
Thank you. All right, so you had a chat with Harper Brar. You have this series, Maupin and Brar in Conversation, which I really, really like. You get deep and theoretical in those. And so the last episode, Harper Brar made a quote from this book here, if you can see it. It's if I can line it up. Anyway, it's the report for the 18th Congress of the CPSUB. And I don't know, I've been digging around Marx's Internet Archive, trying to find essentially the Marxist equivalent of the Dead Sea Scrolls, where there's all those things that no one really knows about, but they're there and they're actually very theoretically valuable. So just to comment on this text that Brar quoted from, it's a report of it's report on the 5-year plan, right? So this is in 1939. So one of the most remarkable periods of socialist development, this document documents, right? So part one is assessing the international situation in 1939. So you can see why that might be interesting. Part two, talking about the internal affairs of the Soviet Union. And then part three is party building. But Brar quoted from the end, and so if you allow me, I'll extend that quotation. I thought it was rather inspiring.
Sure.
The chief endeavor of the bourgeoisie of all countries and of its reformist hangers-on is to kill in the working class the faith in its own strength, faith in the possibility and inevitability of its victory, and thus to perpetuate capitalist slavery. For the bourgeoisie knows that if capitalism has not yet been overthrown and still continues to exist, it owes it not to its own merits, but to the fact that the proletariat has not enough strength, has not enough faith in the possibility of its victory. it cannot be said that the efforts of the bourgeoisie in this respect have been altogether unsuccessful. It must be confessed that the bourgeoisie and its agents among the working class have to some extent succeeded in poisoning the minds of the working class with the venom of doubt and skepticism. If the successes of the working class of our country, if its fight and victory serve to rouse the spirit of the working class in the capitalist countries and to strengthen the faith in its own power and its own victory, then the party may say that its work has not been in vain. There we go. And then long live our victorious working class. And then it goes down the list.
Well, thank you, CJ. Thanks for sharing that quote with us. And there you go. If you find any other quotes, be sure to pass them along. That's a great contribution. And thank you very much. How are things in Chicago?
Things are going pretty well. We're trying to figure out how we're going to do the Alex Saab protest, whether to do it downtown or perhaps some other area. And we're actually arranging a call with the Workers' Party of Britain, associated with the Brars, about one of their recent projects of kind of like surveying, canvassing the certain housing project and kind of seeing how they do that kind of work, and then trying to incorporate that into our general work also.
Very good. Well, thank you, CJ. Great work you're doing in Chicago. If anyone's in Chicago, they should contact CJ and CPI Chicago. You can check us out on the website, cpiusa.org. There's a Chicago section to get involved. They're having great reading groups locally. A lot of great folks are working with you, Dana and Gabby and yourself and others. Sam, I believe, right?
Yes.
So great stuff. So shout out to everybody in Chicago. And I'm hoping I'll be there this spring. Fingers crossed, right? This spring. It looks like I'm in Chicago right now. I'm focused on this big event in Texas, March 12th. But hopefully this spring I will find my way to Chicago. So fingers crossed on that. Thank you, CJ. All my best.
All right.
Yep. All right. And we're going to keep answering super chats. All right. The Arab Spring protests about food prices. They started out, but they were hijacked for geopolitical ends. Yes. Following the financial crisis. There was the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And then throughout the Middle East, there was a drought. And so crops were not growing. The drought was tied in with global warming. And because of that drought that was happening, as well as because of the mass unemployment caused by the financial crisis, there were homeless people gathering in the cities of Tunisia and Egypt and Syria and other places. And as a result of that, you had the Tunisian fruit seller who lit himself on fire, but it went viral. And we now know that this Tunisian fruit seller lit himself on fire, committed suicide, but his video went viral. And pretty soon the government of Tunisia was toppled, and the government of Egypt was toppled. And that what happened was that there was a feeling on the part of the US government and on the part of Silicon Valley that the rebellion was coming, the explosion was coming as a result of unemployment. And the question was, how can we make the rebellion happen on our terms, right? And they had a president of the United States who was African-American, whose middle name was Hussein, who had gone to a Muslim school. And they thought, now is the time for a controlled release. Let's make the revolution happen now on our terms. Let's not have the revolution happen, and just have it, just happen, spontaneously. Let's have it as a controlled release when we have a president who's much more sympathetic, or appears much more sympathetic to the Muslim world. I joke that Barack Obama was a 21st century Napoleon. When Napoleon wanted to conquer the Middle East, he went to the Middle East and he put up posters everywhere saying he was a Muslim. Yes, I'm a Muslim and I will help fight the British. I've read the Quran. I'm a follower of the Prophet. It was all malarkey. Napoleon was not a Muslim, but he put up those posters as a way to convince people in the Middle East they could trust him so that he could colonize them effectively. I think Barack Obama was a similar measure. And there was a feeling, okay, we got Barack Obama as the president. And now they used Facebook, they used Twitter, they used Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera was very important. And the Muslim Brotherhood, and they had a controlled release. And in Tunisia, they overthrew the government and they toppled Ben Ali and they brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power. And in Egypt, they toppled Hosni Mubarak and then they brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power, and then the military overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood. Now the military is back in power in Egypt, but not Mubarak, who was the leader of the military before. And that, in Syria, they were able to foment civil war, but they didn't completely control it. In Bahrain, for example, the Shia Muslim community rose up and they overthrew the monarchy. And so Saudi Arabia invaded Bahrain and reinstalled the monarchy. And you'll notice CNN even paid for a documentary about Bahrain and never aired it because, the U.S. imperialists support the Bahraini monarchy against the majority of Bahraini people who are Shia Muslims. And you'll also notice that in Yemen, they lost control of it as well. And that, in Yemen, they used it to topple Saleh and to bring Mansour Hadi into power, who was the Saudis' puppet. But then the Houthis, Ansar Allah, kept fighting, and the Arab Spring Party and the Southern Movement, and now the war in Yemen has persisted. So they couldn't completely control it like they wanted to. But that is my feeling, is that amid the financial crisis, and amid the drought in the Middle East, the Silicon Valley fascists and Hillary Clinton's State Department, they said, all right, we're going to have a controlled demolition here. We're going to make the revolution happen as a way of damage control. They saw there was a tinderbox, and they said, rather than letting it catch on fire randomly, we're just going to start the flame now and have a controlled burn. And that's what they did. And in Syria and in Libya, it had great results for them. They destabilized Syria and killed hundreds of thousands of people, millions of refugees. A socialist country, an anti-imperialist country, has been thrown into chaos. In Libya, they took the most prosperous African country and ground it into chaos and poverty and destroyed a big competitor on the oil markets. So they were able to manipulate the Arab Spring to serve their own ends, but they didn't completely control it. But that's my feeling about the Arab Spring. Next question. All right. Did Putin threaten NATO countries with nuclear war? No. Russia, from the time of the Soviet Union all the way up to now, has always had a policy that they will never be the first to strike with nuclear weapons. Never. That's always been Russia's policy from the Soviet Union time up until today. The United States has never said that. The United States has no such policy. The USA has never said that they would not commit the first strike with nuclear weapons. But that has always been Russia's policy, that they would never commit a first strike with nuclear weapons. And one of Putin's security guarantees is this call for nuclear weapons to be removed from Eastern Europe. That's pretty darn reasonable. What happened when the Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba? We call it the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? We would not be happy if Russia put nukes in Cuba, if Russia put nukes in Mexico. So for Putin to say we don't want any nukes in Eastern Europe as a security guarantee is pretty reasonable. It's a pretty reasonable guarantee. But no, Putin did not threaten nuclear annihilation. That didn't happen. All right, downtrodden people of Ottawa deserve their respect. Well, look, this is really interesting, isn't it? Usually this is the right wing. I mean, this is the person who asked this question is referring to what's going on in Ottawa right now, right? That these truckers who are protesting the vaccine mandates have gathered in Ottawa. They're honking their horns, they're dancing, they're making a lot of noise. And a lot of the folks in Ottawa, the local residents, aren't happy about it. And it's funny because I remember I was part of Occupy Wall Street, and I remember how the exact same complaint, all the rich people who live in the high-rise apartments near Wall Street, that was what they said, right? And the right wing was like, oh, it's not fair. These neighborhoods have to have all these hippies making noise. This is what happens in Hong Kong. You'll recall, that a lot of the local residents didn't like the Occupy Hong Kong anti-Chinese government protesters. And yes, if there's a 24/7 protest happening in your neighborhood, it can be rather unpleasant. Then it can be, hard to sleep with a lot of noise happening. And I sympathize with the people of Ottawa. At the same time, though, I think that a lot of working class people, truckers and others, are sick and tired of how this pandemic has been used by the richest of the rich to push their agenda. And they're protesting and they want to be heard. I was watching, CNN. I couldn't believe how much CNN is propaganda. I was watching it and they're talking about all of these dangerous truckers are going to block the roads. China supporting Argentina's Falklands claim. All right. They're blocking the roads and all of this. And I thought, yeah, because they actually want to get what they want. In the United States, the left, it seems the only thing they can do is vote for AOC to get what they want. And, the Medicare for All march was just a march demanding healthcare for all, force the vote. And the response to it was, oh my gosh, you're a fascist. But it sounds like these right wingers actually want to get what they want. So they're shutting down the economy. That's what strikes are. That's what occupations and sit-ins are, right? Historically, left-wing movements, you know, they occupied their factories. They had sit-down strikes. They blocked the roads, right? You know, I mean, you know, there was an incident in Berkeley, California, where the Vietnam protesters, they blocked troop trains and they blocked trains from going to Vietnam. And that, yes, you shut things down when you're a movement that you're trying to exert force. You know, what's the quote? I believe it was Mario Savio, who was the leader of the free speech movement in Berkeley. He said, "There comes a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious that you can't take part. You cannot even passively take part. You've got to throw yourself upon the gears and upon the wheels, and you've got to make clear to those who own it and those who run it that unless you're free, the machine will be stopped from functioning at all," right? That was the quote. That's what the left used to do this. They used to shut things down. Now they vote for AOC and they call people Nazis on the internet, and they call up Midwest Marx's boss and threaten to get him fired because he's pro-China. But it used to be that, yes, left-wing movements made demands like healthcare for all, like jobs for all, like union contracts. And if they didn't get their demands, they shut things down. So why should we be surprised that the truckers are doing it? Seems like the right wing now knows how to protest and we don't. Do you think the Canadian Republican movement will emerge? I mean, we shall see. I know that's what Ewoks Unhinged has really pushed for that, and we shall see. We shall see. All right, next super chat question. Christianity in the Roman Empire, did it become a vehicle of class struggle? Yes. Yes, it did. And if you read Jesus is a Socialist, the book that I published along with Keaton Mansfield, where we talked about the origin of Christianity, we get into that. And also, you should watch my Bible class. We're going to have our next class, Bible and the Proletarian Movement. That'll be Monday night, class number 2. And that whole series, we were talking about the proletariat and Christianity, and we're going to talk all about that. So there you go. If somebody else wants to hop on, I can take a couple more before we shut down here. American workers are the legacy of Stoicism. In some ways, yes, right? The obsession with hard work in the United States. We tend to be really into hard work. They call Americans motor-minded around the world, you know, and, you know, kind of the American dream, work hard. Part of that is Anglo, too. Part of that is the Victorian England culture. You know, Victorian Anglo culture. But yes, that's very much part of the American spirit, and American working class folks, a lot of them have this, you know, this work hard, you know, kind of thing that you could say is very stoic. Was the USSR involved in the Pacific in World War II? Well, you know, Soviet troops liberated the northern half of the Korean Peninsula. The Soviet Union gave all kinds of military support to China in their fight against the Japanese invaders. You know, so yes, they were involved. And, you know, Japanese communists, you know, got jobs in armaments factories, and they would sabotage the bombs in the factory and sabotage the shells that they were making. Japanese communists, you know, worked very hard. And a lot of people forget this, but, you know, when the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, half of the people that were killed, I've heard half, but some people say it's a little less than half, but a very large percentage of the people killed were not Japanese. They were Korean slaves. Right? In Japan, they used the slave labor of Korean people in their factories. And a very big percentage of those killed at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were Korean slaves. And after the Second World War, when the Korean slaves were free to go home, the overwhelming majority went to North Korea, not South Korea. The Korean slaves were communists largely. In fact, the majority of the Japanese Communist Party were Koreans who were enslaved in Japan. And when they had the right to go home, most of them didn't go home to South Korea, where, you know, Syngman Rhee, the puppet dictator of the United States, was in power. They went home to North Korea, where the Korean Workers' Party was in power. And that the Japanese Communist Party, which is still around, now it's become kind of Euro-communist and reformist. But for a long time, even after World War II and the post-war years, the Japanese Communist Party was very influenced by Koreans because of Korean slaves in Japan. Very fascinating history. And yes, you can talk about Manchuria. You can talk about you know, the fighting that went on against the Japanese invaders and such. Yes, the Soviet Union played a role in the Pacific theater, most certainly. Yes. All right. Obviously, their primary role was in the European theater, where they were directly invaded. But there you go. What is important about the distinction between exchange and use value? All right. Exchange and use value. All right. All right. All right. Next question. China supports Argentina's claim for the Falklands. Well, yeah, okay. Not surprising. You know, I mean, I don't support the British Empire anywhere. So yeah, you know, that whole Falklands War, a lot of people were like, well, the government of Argentina was no good. Well, it was better than the British Empire. You know, and there you go, right? I mean, that's all there is to that, right? And that's, I mean, it's like, okay, sure, the government in Argentina that was fighting the British in the Falklands War wasn't the best. Sure, but at least it was better than the British imperialists. I mean, it was a situation where this government was kind of on the verge of collapse. And so it was kind of whipping up nationalist fervor. We're going to go seize these islands that the British have seized. You know, and I mean, I support the colonized people against the imperialists, period. So there you go. Exchange and use value. Well, exchange value is how much you sell it for, right? That's the price. Whereas use value is what it is actually worth, right? And that there is a difference between those things, right? And this is where it gets a little tricky when we talk about surplus value, right? You know, workers not getting paid the value of their labor. What it means is they're not getting paid the percentage that they put into the ultimate price of the product, right? And this is where Peter Kropotkin and some of the anarchist thinkers, they get like, well, what is the real value? How do you know what the value? How can you really say what the value of the labor is? How can you really say what the value of the product is, right? If I watch a movie and that movie changes, you know, my brother, great example. My brother, I took him to go see the movie School of Rock at one point, and our tickets probably cost $5.25, right? And it was Sunday, and I took my younger brother. We went to the movies in my little town where movies were dirt cheap. I think the movie theaters closed down. We went to go see the movie School of Rock, which is a hit, you know, was a movie that came out. Well, my brother saw that movie, and then he decided he wanted to play the guitar, and then he studied. He's getting his PhD in music now. Well, was that movie worth $5.25 to my brother? Obviously not, right? It changed his life, made him want to become a musician. You know, now he studied music. He's getting his PhD in music. I mean, it's like, so clearly that movie was not worth $5.25, which was the exchange value. However, that's what we paid for it. The exchange value was, you know, $5.25, but use value. How do you know what something is worth? It's very hard to determine what it's worth, but who's to say it's really worth that, right? Maybe my brother would have discovered his love for music some other way, and maybe he would have become musical in another way. We don't know that, right? So you can't really prove the exchange value or the use value of a product. You really can't do that, right, at the end of the day. However, when we talk about surplus value, that's that the worker does not get the percentage they put into the product, right? That their wage does not reflect the percentage of the final price of the product that they put into it. That's what that is. It's like a mathematical formula. So there you go. Should I join CPI, although I'm in Ireland? Well, at this point, we're only operating in the United States. In Britain, there's a fellow in Scotland who's trying to form the CPI of Scotland. He's a member of the Workers' Party, great guy. In Australia, the CPI aligned organization is known as the Australians for a New Democracy. A great organization, David Fox and Helen Woolley. And if you would like to form an affiliate organization in Ireland, I would love to help you do that. So shoot me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com, and we'll try to work with you about forming an affiliate. But at this time, CPI is a US-based organization. We have allied organizations at this point. We have one in Australia. We're in the process of setting one up in Britain as well, and we'd love to have one in Ireland. Absolutely. All right. Does China's One Belt, One Road initiative interfere with Russia's Eurasian Economic Union's plans? Well, they're very similar. It's about building infrastructure, but the Eurasian Economic Union is a trade deal. It's like a trade deal. It's you know, it's certain countries are members of it, et cetera. Whereas the Belt and Road is an infrastructure building plan. It's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They're not the same thing, right? The Eurasian Economic Union it's like NAFTA, except it's very different than NAFTA, but it's similar. It's a trade agreement that you're a member of. Belt and Road Initiative is a bank that you pay into. The bank loans you money for infrastructure. Then as your country gets wealthier, you pay into the bank. It's a little bit different. It's a different model, right? Eurasian Economic Union is like a trade agreement for a certain region, and you know, the Belt and Road Initiative is a bank that you pay into that funds infrastructure. A different program, different type of program. All right, folks, I am going to wrap it up here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody.